Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Kuf Ayin 170 in Baba Basra as we learn for Hachenukal based on some Sarva Shivya, and specifically for those injured last night in the attack on the bus coming from Gush. Was a 12-year-old boy was killed on a shooting attack on the bus. They came from Bethlehem, our friends, our cousins. All right, so the Mishnah, the Gemara said yesterday, the Brisa said that if a person comes with two claims, now if a person's on a land, and then there's a protester who says, you're on my land. And the person on land says, number one, I have a shtar. I have a deed that you gave me. Number two, I have a chazak of 3 years. So what happens? Rebbe says, need him a shtar. Well, he said about the shtar, let's prove the shtar. Let's check out the shtar. Whereas Rav Shimon says, no, chazak is good enough. If he's got to eat him for 3 years, chazak of 3 years, that's good enough. He's got to eat him to that effect. Whereas Rebbe said, no, you have to check out the shtar. We'll see what's the nature of the machlokas. First, we thought the machlokas was osios nikish me'asira, right? That Rebbe holds that Shmuel says the osios are not nikish me'asira. You have to prove your chazak of 3 years. Rebbe says no, just having the deed is good enough, like a bearer bond. If I have a deed that's in my possession, that's good enough. The Gemara says that doesn't make any sense. Why? Because we just had before that Shmuel says that osios are nikish me'asira. That's what we explained yesterday. And why did he say in the Brisa back on Kuf Samach Tesam and Aleph yesterday's stuff at the beginning? It said that if you have the shtar in your hand, that's good enough. That's all you have. If you give back the shtar, it's like you return the item. So he holds osios are nikish me'asira. So if you say over here that osios are not nikish me'asira, it's a steering of Shimon Gamliel. So the Gemara want to say, well, wait, maybe the machlokas is a different machlokas here. When Rebbe says that you look at the shtar, Shimon Gamliel says you look at the chazaka, we're talking about a different machlokas, the famous machlokas of Meir and Rabbi Lazar, of Eider Masira Karti or Eider Chasima Karti. In other words, this shtar had no Eidim on it. Had no Eidim. Do you still look at the shtar? Yes. Rebbe holds like Rabbi Lazar, right? That Rebbe holds like Rabbi Lazar who says that Eidim Masira Karti, and we don't care if there's Eidim on the shtar or not. And therefore, as long as there's Eidim who handed it over, check that out, and you're okay. Shmuel says, no, look at the chazaka. Why? Because Eidim Chasima Karti. If there's no Eidim on the shtar is no good. You have to have Eidim on the shtar. And therefore, that's where Shmuel says over here, you look at the chazaka. Okay, that's one way to learn. Then we're about pardon? Then that's helpful. That's helpful because if there's a question later on, maybe no. If there's Eidim on the shtar, that's as good. That's better than a chazaka because that's the shtar. So if you have Eidim on the shtar and Eidim Chasima Karti, and that's great. You got a shtar, a valid shtar. It's checked out. You could ratify it in court. Check out that the Eidim are legitimate and all that. That's better than a chazaka. That's better than a chazaka. But over here it's speaking about maybe this is the machlokas where there's no Eidim on the shtar. Rebbe says you can still look at the shtar because we don't care if there's Eidim on the shtar. Not as long as they're not forged Eidim on the shtar. In other words, or invalid Eidim, disqualified Eidim on the shtar. That would be bad. That's worse. It's better to have no Eidim than have Eidim that are disqualified. But if there's no Eidim Masira Karti. That's Rebbe Shita. Whereas Rabbi says no, you have to have Eidim on the shtar. That's one way to learn. That's the second way to learn. We said the first way of Osius Masira that was rejected. That was refuted. That so one way to learn is that the machlokas is whether Eider Chasima Karti or Eider Masira Karti. This is where we left off yesterday, almost halfway down the page. Here's what happened. The protester says, yeah, I wrote the shtar. This was a shtar of a deed, but I lost it. This guy found it. I never gave it to him. There was never any transaction. That's what happened over here. So that's machlokas. If he's motive that he wrote it, motive b'shtar shekasfu, do you have to ratify it or not? Rebbe suffer motive b'shtar shekasfu ain't tzarich l'kaimo. Look at the shtar. Man comes along with a shtar and a chazaka. Even if the shtar, as long as the protester admitted that he wrote it, he says I wrote it, but I never handed it to him. The deal never went through. I had the lawyers draw it up. The scribe wrote it in anticipation of the deal, but the deal never took place. That's what the Rebbe says. That's like the shtar. Rav Shimon Gamliel savar tzarich l'kaimo, that you have to be mekayim even if he's moda that he wrote it, but he also says, I moda that I wrote it, but I never handed it to him. The deal was never completed. So maybe that's the way to learn the machlokas between Rebbe and Rav Shimon Gamliel. When a person says to the protester, I have a star and a chazaka, Rebbe says, you look at the star, Rav Shimon Gamliel says, you look at the chazaka, maybe that's the machlokas over here. Whether motive b'shashakos was sarach l'kaim or not, Rebbe says you don't have to it. As long as he's motive that he wrote the star, even if he says the transaction never took place, you look at the star. If the star is good, that's all you need. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says no. He's motive that he wrote it, but he says it never took place. If you have to look at the chazaka, if he has a chazaka of 3 years, remember what does a chazaka of 3 years do? It confirms it's like proof of purchase, but I have to claim I purchased it. He claimed I purchased it. If you just say I've been squatting on the land for 3 years or for 10 years, that doesn't mean anything. You have squatters. Nothing of squatters' rights. You don't own it just because you were there, unless it was hefker. It's not hefker. All right, so maybe that's the way to machlokas. Rebbe holds Shmuel says this kamo. That doesn't make sense. We learned the other way around. The Tanya we learned, as we learned that Rabbi Shmuel and Rebbe Shizas are reversed with regard to tzarach l'kaimo or not. Here you say Rebbe holds ein tzarach l'kaimo, Shmuel says tzarach l'kaimo. We see the other way around. The Tanya Shnai meduk mashtar. We had this in Bamatzia. Two people are holding on, right? They're clinging to a star. Malva says, Shali, Malva says, listen, it was my star. It was an IOU that this guy owed me money. Shali, if enough money dropped, I dropped it, and he picked it up. And they're both, and he picked it up as I hadn't yet, he owes me the money. And I gave him the money, and I had the star, and I dropped it for a second. He picked it up. The Lova picked it up. So he found it, or he picked it up, whatever he found it, and therefore he still owes me the money. It's an IOU. The says, no, yeah, it was your star, but I paid you back, and that's why you gave me back the star. Now you're trying to grab it again. So who's telling the truth over here? The Malva says, I dropped it, you still owe me the money. Huh? Okay, they're both holding on to it. There's no Motzi Mechavero. Who holds on to this? They're both holding on to the star. So what do you say over there? Rebbe says over there, well, you ratify the star by confirming the signatures, and the Malva can collect. The IOU says he collects it. If the Lova was right that he paid him back, he should have ripped it up, but he didn't get a chance to, whatever it was, that's all you need. In other words, motor b'shtar shekasvu, yiskayim b'shtar b'chos, you have to be mekayim it. It's not enough to say, you don't say motor b'shtar, you don't say he motive that he wrote it. Now, the Lova's motive that the star was written, but he says, I paid it back already. He says, well, you have to still be mekayim it. So here Rebbe says, even though the Lova's motive that it was a valid IOU, but you still have to be mekayim it. Shmuel says, yachloku, you split it. Since they're both holding on to it, what are you going to do? You don't know who's telling the truth. You split it. Okay. Well, who says he comes out ahead? Maybe he's telling the truth that the guy never paid him back yet. So Vavidenbaum, we asked the kasha, but Leslie Rebbe says what? The Malva can collect the whole thing just by ratifying the star? But Leslie Rebbe Hodatan, what is it? Every kid in school, his first Gemara that he learns is Shai Melchim Batalis, the beginning of Bambatzia. Doesn't Rebbe hold to that mission? It says two people are holding on to a talis. Each guy says, I found it. The first one swears, I swear I don't have less than half. We don't want to swear that they have the whole thing, because then one of them is for sure a liar. And the other ones, so they each swear they don't have less than half. When you split it. So doesn't Rebbe hold to that all split it? Why do you say here? Shmuel says you split it. Rebbe says, no, you're Makayim you ratify the Adam and ratify it, and the Malva collect the whole thing. Doesn't he hold the Achloku? He answered it. Everybody agrees that once it's ratified, you split it. Keep pligi b'shein mukoyim. The machlokes is when it's not mukoyim. Rebbe said, you have to Makayim it. Be Makayim like up in Palka. He doesn't mean to say that if you're Makayim it, you can collect the whole thing. He also agrees you only get half of it if you Makayim it. Be low if you're not Makayim it. Chas b'yam is just a shard. It doesn't mean anything. Maybe who says it's even legitimate? Maybe the whole thing is for Reb Shimon Gamliel suffer. He says no. If the low was motive that it was a good IOU, he just says I paid it back. You don't have to Makayim it. They both good. But what do you see over here? The Rebbe holds with tzarach l'kaimo. And Shmuel ain't tzarach l'kaimo, so it's the verse of what we just tried to explain the Baisa. The Gemara says epoch. Turn one of them around. We don't know which one, but turn one of them around. Turn the Shita's Rebbe and Shmuel around, so the machlokas could be whether motor b'shashikos tzarach l'kaimo or not. In other words, if the one who stands to lose the money, in this case, either the seller or the lova, in the case of an IOU, whoever stands to lose the money, if he's motive that it's written, One says tzarich l'kaimo, you still have l'kaimo, otherwise he can't collect. Another says ain't tzarich l'kaimo. Okay, maybe that's the machlokas. That's one way to learn the machlokas. To say that the shitas are reversed and turned around, that's a little bit of a dochek. So you have a stira, you have a contradiction between two brises. In one case, the machlokas is A, and the other machlokas is B, is reverse. So switch it around. Better to say don't say that, and so don't turn around. Over here in our brisa that we started with yesterday, 4 lines from the bottom of Kuf Samach Tesam and Beis, this machlokas, if a person tells the protester, the guy is trying to take away his land, he says, no, I have a shtar and a chazaka, and that's what Rebbe says. From Shmuel says, no, you prove with a chazaka. The machlokas is not about or not. Let's leave that brisa that we just asked from Shnaya Adukim B'Shtar. Let's leave it the way it reads. The Rebbe holds and Shmuel holds ain't tzarich l'kaimo. And don't say that's the machlokas over here in our case where you're telling the protester I have a shtar and a chazaka, and one says, Rebbe says, be mekayim with the shtar, and Reb Shmuel says with a chazaka. Don't switch it around at all. If you hear the machlokas is about proving a claim, what are we talking about? If a person says, a guy comes to me, he says, what are you doing on my land? What are you doing in my house? And I say, listen, I bought it from you some years ago, and I've been here for 3 years, and you've been around. You could have protested. Remember the protest, he has to be around. If the other guy was in China and he couldn't protest, that doesn't count. It's 3 years I've been here on the land, and you could have protested, and you didn't. And I have proof I've been here for 3 years. I got Kurt's a neighbor, Irving's a neighbor. You all been seeing me here for 3 years. So you know I'm here for 3 years. And the supposed owner hasn't said anything. So I have to do is that's a chazaka. That's good enough. Where's my deed? I lost it. You bought it, 35 years ago. I bought it. What do you want from me now? I don't have to hold on. That would be a good of a claim. But instead, I said I have a shtar. Instead, I have a shtar and a chazaka. So I didn't have to say I have a shtar. But once I said I have a shtar, then the protester is allowed to say, okay, let's prove the shtar. I didn't have to say the shtar. I could have just said chazaka. That's good enough. You have nothing. You can't beat me. Yeah. But sometimes, pardon? If you say both. You say both. That's the issue over here. When I say both, and then I can't prove the second claim, the shtar. There's some question about the shtar. Does that put me in a worse position or not? Rav Shimon, we're going to say, says, no, you don't have to forget about it. You can't prove the shtar. Chazaka is good enough. You threw that in. Okay, whether you have the shtar, whether you can prove the shtar, that doesn't make any difference. Rabbi says, no. Once you mention the shtar, you better prove it. In other words, sometimes it's not a good idea to come with too many claims, right? As an aside, that's what they're talking about with the judgment of our prime minister, that they threw a lot of extra stuff in there to try to build it up. He said if you figure out all the champagne and cigars that he got over 5 years, and maybe he gave maybe to this one he did give some present, but he did give some priorities. But to Milchen he didn't. To Packer he did, and the Milchen he didn't, because he's strong. They were trying to build up a case, so they added too much, and the extra part is not proof at all. You're just trying to build up the amounts. So sometimes when you add too much, you hurt yourself. You hurt the claim. You hurt your own case. You hurt your own case. See, back in the Gemara, about 10, 12 lines from the bottom of the page in the Gemara. We're talking about proving it. Let's listen to this case. We give an example. He had a claim against Rav Abba for some money. He owes him. He says, Rav Abba, you owe me money. Also came Rav Yitzchak. They came before, not this Rav Yitzchak. Yosef had a claim against Rav Abba. They came before Rav Yitzchak Smith, who was like the judge, let's say. Amar, and then Rav Abba said, Praticha b'fnei ploni ploni. What do you mean I owe you the money? I paid you in front of two witnesses. Amar Rav Yitzchak, so Rav Yitzchak Nafcha said to him, Yavo ploni ploni, let them come and testify. Now, the rule is that even if you lend money to somebody in front of witnesses, you can claim afterwards I paid you, that the guy paid. The lover can claim I paid you back. There's no law that says I have to pay you back in front of witnesses. Two people said, say, okay, hey, a guy comes over to me and sure, can you lend me 100 shekels? I said, sure. There's Adam who saw it. Next day I said, where's the money? He says, I paid you back last night in Mincha Marav. I paid you back last night. There's no way. So over here, Here he says, well, but I paid you in front of these two guys. Let's say I paid in front of these two guys. Now you can't find those two guys. Amrlei, ilo asu lo mehemna. Let's say I can't find. So he said, Rav Abba said, I paid you in front of those two witnesses. I paid you back. And he says, so Yitzchak Nafka says, okay, bring the Edom. He says, okay, I can't get the Edom now. They died or they traveled or they're not here right now. And if I can't get them, I'm not believed. There's no rule. For Kamilan we hold, Hamal v'schaver be'edom, even if you lend money to somebody be'edom, ain't tzarich lefarm, unless it was written into an IOU. You know, an IOU, I promise to pay you back in front of two witnesses. Unless you didn't, if you didn't do that, just because you lent me the money in front of two witnesses doesn't mean I have to pay you back. So he says over here, I paid you back already. I paid you back in front of those two guys. Says the judge, okay, bring those two guys. Oh, and if I can't find those two guys, you're not going to believe me? I don't have to pay you back. I just said I paid you back in front of it, but I didn't really have to. Omerlei, Anabahika Shmaita Demarsvile. What do you mean? In that case, I hold like your own case. You Rav Abba, who are the borrower in this case, the debtor. I hold like you. You made a statement. You made a statement to Marsville. I hold. Domer of Abba, you yourself said you made a statement in the name of Rav. You said the name of Rav. Who said the name of Rav? If a guy says I paid you back in front of these two witnesses, they have to come and testify. And if they don't testify, I ruin my own case. I could have just said I paid you back at Mincha last night. But if I said I paid you back in front of these two guys and I can't bring those two guys, I'm the loser here. Amalei. So Rav Abba answered him, okay, that's what you say over there. That's what I said in the name of Rav. But Rav Gidol Rav said, Allah the Allah over here, that what? That you don't have to. I don't ruin my case. I didn't ruin my case. Take a look at Rashbam. Rashbam here is on both sides. There's no toasts on this page. Rashbam on the left side, about 20 lines from the bottom of the page, Divya Maskil, V'amar Rav Gidol Marav, Allah Mishum in the case of the Bryce that we brought down at the bottom of Samach Tesamid Bays, the halacha is what? That you could do it even with the chazaka. This is Shiloh over here, Rashbam mentioned before, when he said either the shtar or the chazaka, right? Levada. The kivin lo tzarich. I didn't have to say I have shtar. You asked me, what am I doing on this land in that case? And I said, I've been here for 3 years. I got witnesses. I got a full thing. I bought it from you. I have 3 witnesses. And I also mentioned the shtar. I didn't have to mention the shtar. I would have been good enough to say the chazaka. Now that I can't prove the shtar, I can't ratify the shtar, you're going to penalize me? No, says Rav Shimon Gamliel. And Allah's like that. The kivin lo hayasarch liton shtar. He didn't have to claim that since he had chazaka, ain't sarch levaris. Rav has to prove it. Shaharbe liton mashain sarch. Many people make extra claims they didn't have to claim. Vanonami kivin to blow eight mehem. Since I would be believed to say I paid you back last night, or it's mine even without the. I don't need the Adam, right? Even if I didn't say I have Adam for them, ain't it so levar? I don't have to bring the Adam. In the case of the loan, I didn't have to say I have Adam. I could have just said I paid you back. So therefore, I don't have to prove it. Okay. Vaf Rebbe, and even Rebbe lo Omar el levar. Even Rebbe who says what that that you say over here, you can prove it with a star. You could prove say with a star. He says I have a star and a chazaka. So he says, okay, prove the shtaka because you want to prove it. Because once he mentioned the star, let's go check it out. But the amalei ananami levar kamina. So he says also, Ivar Migalav said lachim shing miliel vaf Rebbe lo amar levar amalei ananami levar kamina. In other words, so Rav Yitzchak Nafka answered him, I'm also just trying to prove the case, not necessarily the halachas that way. What does we mean by that? So Rashbam, the last Rashbam in Amar Aleph says, Klomer menaden alach Rav Shimon Gamliel. Shaf Rebbe lo nechlek el mishum desfile the sorch levaris vard. Once you mentioned that you have a star, let's prove it. Let's check it out. Yesh li star. Rebbe Moda, Rebbe himself was Moda shimlo ton lo yatzarch el chazak. You didn't have to claim. You didn't have to mention the star at all. But since he mentioned it, so we want to check it out. But the truth is, even if he wouldn't mention the star, the chazak is good enough. So since the thing is only to check it out, since you mentioned, let's check it out. So Rashbam says the halacha seems to be like Shimon Gamliel, and that's really what Rav Gidol Marav said. That's what Rav Abba said. Rav Abba said, they said, Rav Abba, and in this case, what happened? Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef says to Rav Abba, you owe me money. Rav Abba said, he came for Rabbi Yitzchak Nafra. Rav Abba said, I paid you back in front of those two guys. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, okay, bring the Adam. Wait, I have to bring the Adam. If I can't bring the Adam, I'm not believed. I would have been believed without if I didn't mention the Adam. And therefore, That's my claim. You say, Rav said, right? Okay, he says you have to do it, but it's better if he mentions the proof, the star, or I said I pay back man, try to bring the item. But Rav Gilmar says, if you can't bring the item, it's okay. Vaf Rebbe lo Amar el Lavar. Amalei Ananami Lavar Kamini. I just want to check it out. What do we mean by that? It says the top Rashbam on Ahmed Beis. Top Rashbam. Amalei Anana Lavar Kamina Klomer Karebi Sfirli. I hold like Rebbe. V'im lo bir dvar of Hifsid. Oh, he says Ananami Lavar Kamina. I said that you have to check it out. In other words, what Rabbi Yitzchak Kanafra, the judge, is saying over here is I hold like Rebbe. And if you didn't prove your case, you said you have a star. Okay, let's prove the star. Let's ratify it. If you can't, you've lost out. He says basically, Rav Shapiro is saying that's what my Rebbe Rashi, my Rabbeinu Skadi, my grandfather Rashi also said that if you can't prove it, we go like Rebbe. Aliba to Rebbe. You lost it out. In other words, you lost out by saying too much. I have a chazaka that would have been good enough, but by saying too much, by saying I have a star, okay, if you can't prove the star, then you lost out. Even though we normally pass like Rebbe when he argues with one person, in this case, the halacha is, even though he wants to check it out, but the halacha is not that way. So according, Rashbam says that my grandfather Rashi seems to said what? That, yeah, you have to check it out. Like he holds like Rebbe, you have to check it out. If you can't prove the star, you've lost out. But Rashbam says the halacha seems to be like that even though I mentioned the star, if I prove the chazaka, that's good enough. I don't have to ratify the star, and my claim is good no matter what. So according to Shimon Gamliel, right, he says right, the mishtar. It seems that there's a machlokas rishonim. How do we paskin? When I'm on a field and a guy comes to protest me, and I say I have a chazaka and a star, do I have to prove the star or not? Rebbe says you have to prove the star. Rav Shmuel says no, chazaka is good enough. That's right. And the extra words that I said, even though I added on the star, I said I have the star. If I can't prove the star, I haven't lost out because as long as I can prove the chazaka, that's good enough. Now says the Mishnah on the base.
When you say migu, I didn't have to say star. The fact that I said star, I have a migu that I didn't really have to say star.
Yeah, what does the migu say? The migu says, believe me when I say this, because I could have said that, right? Okay, I could have left it out. I could have pesha hitter, right? But over here, you said something, so prove it. In other words, I didn't have to say anything. That's a sort of a migu. It's like a pesha hitter. Rashbam refers to pesha hitter, but he refers to it in the discussion about ain't tzarich l'kaim or not. But over here, in other words, what's the issue? The issue is believe we have the chazaka. He says I have a chazaka. We're believing about the chazaka. But if you said this, you have a star, let's ratify the star. Okay, so it is a way of saying I didn't have to mention it all. That's Rashbam Taka Pasuk Shimon Gamliel, that the chazaka is good enough. You could just discount that. Rebbe Olds, if you mentioned it already, let's check it out. Mishapar says the mission. Mishapar makes this chav. We had this before. A guy owes Malva and a lova, and the Malva lent him $100 on January 1st. On February 1st, he paid him back $25. Paid him back. What do you do with the star? What do you do now? I have an IOU, you owe me $100. You come with $25. I want you to pay the whole thing. But what does the lova usually say? I don't have all the money now. Give me some more time. I'll pay it back later on. So what do you do? If the Malva keeps the star, the IOU that says he owes him $100, that means he can collect the whole $100 later on, right? Even though he's paying him $25.
Write on it.
Can he write on it? What?
That he received.
Write on that thing. That's a good idea. Let's say there's no room to write on there. There's no room to. That's just a shar says that Adam signed. Don't forget the Adam are signed on it, right? That he owes him the $100. So now you're going to put that in. Is it going to be below the Adam, above the Adam? That's a little complicated. So what do you do? If you give it, before we said you can give it to a third person. They both trusted a third neutral middleman. And they said, listen, hold on to it till he pays back the rest. Okay. But what do you do? So Misha Par makes receipts. Let's look at these are the options. Misha Par makes this chova, Rabbi Omer Yachlif, tear it up, write a new star. Dated from January 1st. On February 1st, he's paying him back $25. Now, when you write a new star for the $75 difference, right? And the Adam could sign on it back from January 1st, even though if he would only write it from February 1st, then he's losing out. Why? Because now the Malva can only go after assets that the Lova had subsequent to February 1st. Let's say the Lova had some property and he sold it on January 15th. Now, if you only have the IOUs dated February 1st, wouldn't be good, right? So that's the Shaila. So what does review mean? It says Yachlef make a new star, and the Adam can sign on it from January 1st, apparently. Okay, we're not sure what he means from this Rishon. Rashbam says Yikros a star v'yichlo star acher lefi cheshbon hanisha mizman Rishon from January 1st. That's what the Gemara is going to see that Rav Yehuda means. You can write a new star from January 1st for the $75 difference, and that's the advantage to the Malva. So he has a new star. He's got a new star. The first star said $100. He paid back $25. We're going to rip that up, and I'm going to write a new one for the $75 difference that you owe me back from January 1st. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yichtov Shofar. Rabbi Yossi says, give him a receipt. Give the Lova a receipt for $25, so then be no issues, right? Except the Lova now has to hold on to the star. He's got to prove it. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda. But he says that's not right. Nim says that that means that the Lova, the Malva really has a claim of $100. That's what the IOU said. But the Lova now has to hold on to his receipt. If he loses his receipt, he's up the creek, as they say, right? He's got to hold on to receipts. It's not fair. Amalo, Rabbi Yossi says, tough luck on him. Let him pay back the loan, and he won't have to worry about the receipt. Amalo, Rabbi Yossi, kach yafalo. It's good for whom? Rashbam says for the Malva. Some say it's good for the Lova to teach him a lesson. Kach yafalo, or kach yafalo. It's good for the Malva, right? Below yera kochel shalzeh, and don't impair the power of the Malva. Rashbam says, let the Lova worry about, I better hold my receipt. Below Malva, the Evid Lova Lish Malva, the pasuk says, right? There's a pasuk, I think, in Mishle, right? Evid Lova Lish Malva. The Lova is like a servant to the Malva because he owes him money. You owe a guy money, you're always going to be nice and you have to serve him, and et cetera, et cetera. Now he's a servant, he's got to hold on to that receipt. He's got let him worry about it. In other words, make him worry about it, let him worry about holding the receipt. That'll encourage him to pay back the loan. So we have machlokas here between Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi. What do? Rabbi Yehuda says you make a new star, and the Adam could sign on it from January 1st, even though when are they writing the star? On February 1st, which isn't such an easy thing to do. It's not complicated, right? Do they have the right to do that? We'll see. But it's forgery? Why? Because everybody agrees to it. Everybody agrees to it. The Malva's there, the Lova's there. The Malva says, you owe me $100. He's like, I'll pay you back $25 now, and let's write a new star. Oh, can you do that or not? So that's the issue over here. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda says you can. Rabbi Yossi says you cannot. Rabbi Yehuda says, why not do a receipt? Rabbi Yehuda says, why should the Lova have to worry about the receipt? Rabbi Yossi says, tough luck, worry about the receipt. Amar Rav Huna in the Gemara. Amar Rav Rav, ein halacha, lo Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yossi. The halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, who says you could just get the Adam to write something on February 1st, dating it back to January 1st. After all, if you don't date it back from January 1st, the Malva is losing out because the Lova might have properties that he sold in the middle of January, right? That the Malva can't claim them now because the date is February 1st. That's no good. The Malva is only going to want to agree to this if he can get it back from January 1st. So Rabbi Yehuda says he can make it from January 1st. So Rav Huna Marav says the halacha is not, this is Rav. Halacha is not like Rabbi, not like Rabbi Yossi. What? Not like Rabbi Yossi, you make him a receipt because a receipt is a hard thing. You have to keep his receipt. And not like Rabbi Yehuda says that the Adam themselves, the Adam can write it from January 1st. Ela Bezdin, you have to take it to a court. A court has the power to do that. Ela Bezdin Mekanish, Bezdin tears up the original IOU. Because no shah, and Bezdin could write a new star, Mizman Rishon. Bezdin could do that. Amrlei Rav, okay, that Bezdin could do it, not Adam. The Adam can't do it. Amrlei Rav Nachman Rav Huna. So Rav Nachman said to Rav Huna, Amrlei Rav Yirmiyah Bara. Abba said to Rav Huna was the one who quoted Rav saying this. In other words, look at the words of the Gemara that we had so far. Rav Huna Marav says we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah has a machlokas Rav Yehuda and Rav Yossi what to do. Right? Rav Yehuda says you make a new star, and Rav Huna says give him a receipt. And Rav comes along to say the halacha is not like either one of these Tanoim in the Mishnah, but rather I'm telling you the halacha. The halacha is like a brisa, which we're going to have on tomorrow's daf, which says that Bezdin can tear it up and write a new one. So Rav is saying the halacha is not like these two rabbis in the Mishnah, but like I'm telling you. Okay, we're going to see. Now, what does that mean? Now, he says what? That Bezdin does it. Now, take a look at Rashbam. In the wide lines in Rashbam, the third line of Rashbam, Divrei Mas v'kosim lo shtar acher, lefi schum amos, shechayev lo adayin, for the $75 that he still owes him. For Rav Tanahu Polig. Rav is an art. Rav was like the end of the Tanam. Right after Rebbe's time, right? Rebbe was the real editor, it was the end of the Tanam. Rav was also around that time. Rabbi Yochanan was also, Rabbi Yochanan, we have the famous called Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, also like Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan also was of the early Amoram. Rav was like a late one of the, at the end of the Tanam and the beginning of the Amoram. So we have many times Rav can argue. And as Rav's arguing with Rabbi Yehuda, who says the Edom alone can make their own star back from January 1st. And he's arguing with Rabbi Yossi, who says you have to do a receipt for the Lova. And he says, no, what you do is Bezdin tears it up and they can make it. Now we have, before we get to a Pirush over here, it says like this. Amalei, Rav Nachman Rav Huna. Rav Nachman said to Rav Huna, who quoted Rav, Rav Huna, and some say here, but Abba said it to Rav Huna, Ishmiele Rav, had Rav heard, listen carefully, Ha Brisa, this Brisa that we're going to have tomorrow on tomorrow's Daf, the Tanya, Eidim Makarnas Ashtar. The Brisa says that the next Daf is going to say a Brisa that seems to be like Rav Yehuda, that says the Eidim can tear up the star because they could write it from verse down. Have a Hadar Bay. Rav would have retracted. Rav just said the law is not like Rav Yehuda, who says the Eidim alone can tear up the star and make a new star for the $75 back from January 1st. The law is not like him. The law is only Bezdin could do it. So they asked the Kasha to Rav Huna, had Rav heard about this Brisa? There's a Brisa that says exactly like Rav Yehuda, that the Eidim can tear up the star and write a new star. Had he known of that Brisa, he would have retracted this, that he said that law is not like Rabbi Yehuda, but rather the Eidim, only Bezdin could do it. Amalei, so Rav Huna retorted, no. Shmiele, Rav did hear that Brisa, below Hadar, and he didn't retract. He didn't hold to that Brisa. Why? Bishlom Beidina Bezdin Alima Lefkui Memona. Bezdin, we have a call Hefker Bezdin Hefker. Bezdin could do whatever they want with money. They could take away your property and give it to somebody else. They have the power to do that. So Bezdin has the right on February 1st to tear up the IOU for $100 and write a new one for $75 and backdate it from January 1st. Bezdin has that power. Ela Edom Shasu Shlichusan. Edom originally signed on the IOU that took place January 1st. They saw the $100 be given over from the Malva to the Lova, and they signed on that. Can they do a shlichus again? What gives them the power to make a new star now and backdate it from January 1st? So therefore, Rav disagrees with that Brisa, and he holds that only Bezdin could do it, not the Edom. The Brisa says Edom could do it. No, Bezdin has the power, not Edom. Says the Gemara below. Is it not true that Edom can make a new star on their own? Confirming the original doc. In other words, can they make a new star? They saw a transaction take place on January 1st for $100. Now that he pays them back $25, they have the right to make a new star from $75. They don't have such a right. Says more, they don't have such a right. Rav, and the fourth line now on Kufay and Aleph Amid Aleph. Rav, Edom kosvan afilu asar stars. If a person has a star and he lost it, he has a star, he has a deed, and he lost it. The Edom can make him another one, and another one, and another one. So you see, you could do it again, even though they have the right to do what they saw right now. Could they have the right to write another one later on? They do. Al Sarachas, on one field, they could even make 10 stars. So so you see Edom do have such a power. So Rabbi Yosef says, no, that's a shtar matana. It's a gift. When you get a gift, there's no guarantee. I give you a gift, if somebody else takes it away, there's no guarantee. If I sell you something, right, then I'm selling to you with a guarantee that if it's taken away from you, you can come after other properties that I had, right? But if I give you a gift, the stam gift doesn't have that kind of an obligation, doesn't have achrayas. So that's a shtar matana. That's when you can write to. Rab Omer b'shtar shein bo achrayas. Rava says, no, that's speaking about a star that has no achrayas, like we said yesterday. Remember when a guy says, I lost my deed? And what's halach? You don't write them 2 deeds because they might be some hanky-panky. You might try to collect twice from later purchasers. But what you could do is you can give them another star that has no obligation in it. That says specifically, if it's taken away from you, you have no rights to claim anything else. That's when they can write other stars. But over here in this case, when the obligations will be from January 1st. Any property that the Lova had after January 1st is meshubit to this loan of $100. He paid back 25. Okay, he still owes him 75. But it's meshubit back. He wants it back from January 1st. The Edom don't have the right to do that, says Rav. Only Bezdin. Okay, so what Rav's saying, I disagree with Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna, and like Rashbam says, Rav Tanu Polik says Rabbi Chana Wasserman asks Kasha, what do you mean? Rav Tanu Polik, Tosa says, he says, bring that from Subas, that Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with this idea of Rav Tanu Polik, right? He doesn't hold the Rav Tanu Polik, but Rabbi Chana Wasserman asks Kasha, L'chora, when the Machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, we pass like Rabbi Yochanan. So we don't hold of Rav Tanu Polik. He's not a Tana. So how does he argue on a Tana? If Rav is not a Tana, how can he argue? So he asked this kasha to Rav Chaim Brisker, and he answered him, the truth is that an Amora could argue with a Tana. A later person could argue with Tana, if he knows specifically. When the Gemara asks, how could this Amora argue with the Tana? Presumably, he didn't know what the Tana wrote. How could he say this? We have a Tana that says otherwise. That's because the Amora didn't, but he's not coming to argue, he just didn't know. But if he says specifically, like in our Gemara, where Rav comes along and says, the loch is not like Rav Yehuda, the loch is not like Rav Yossi, the loch is not like them. If he wants to, he could argue. Even there, everybody agrees that he could. A Tana could argue. Even if you hold, like Rabbi Yochanan, that Rav wasn't a Tana. Even if you hold Rav wasn't a Tana, how can you say Rav Tana Polik? Even if you hold Rav wasn't a Tana, but if he is as an Amora, if he wants to argue, he says specifically, I want to argue, then he could. Then he could argue with that. Also, it could be, when we said Rav Tana Polik, some say it's only on Brises and not on Mishnayos, but over here he's arguing on a Mishnah. Rav says to argue Mishnah. Gemara says right away, I'm over Rav. Rav says the Alcha is not like Rav Yehuda in the Mishnah, it's not like Rav Yossi in the Mishnah, but rather Bezin must do it. That's what we say. Bezin must do it. The Brisa, they asked the Kasha, what about a Brisa says the Edom could do it? Rav doesn't hold to that. So Rav is arguing on it. You say over here, Rav Tano Polik. Some say Rav Moshe Feinstein says that Rav Tano Polik is only on Brisa, it's not on Mishnayos. Here he's arguing on a Mishnah. Could be that when he says Rav Tano Polik, that he argues he says that Rav Tano Polik is not on Brisa and not on Mishnayos. Maybe when he says that Rav Tana Polik is only on Brisa, it's not on Mishnah, maybe Rav wouldn't argue on a Stam Mishnah. On a Stam Mishnah, it seems to be the halacha is like a Stam Mishnah. But over here, when the Mishnah says specifically Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, and Rav comes along to say the halacha is not like either one of them, but rather like I'm telling you, only with the Bezdin, then he has the power to argue, even if you say that he's not a Tana. But if he wants to argue, he could argue. In other words, Rav Chaim Brisker explained that this we say that we ask Akasha, how can a Amora say this? We have a Mishnah that says otherwise, because the Amora of Mary didn't know the Mishnah. But if he knows the Mishnah, he says specifically, I'm arguing with the Mishnah, then he has the power to do so. What's the Brisa? This Brisa that we talk about that Rav doesn't hold of, that says even Adam could do it. Tomorrow we'll see that Brisa starting with the 6th line on Kuf Ayin Aleph. Have a good day, everybody. Kol Tuv.